Unknown planets, legendary battles, and incredible stories await you here. But don't forget to be a part of this universe. Subscribe, like, comment, be a part of this great adventure. The message arrived in the dead of night, slicing through the quiet hum of human civilization like a scalpel through silk. Across cities, space stations, and distant colonies, every screen, every interface, every illuminated surface flickered and dimmed. Then, as if commanded by an unseen force, they all coalesced into a singular image. A figure, humanoid yet unervingly perfect, standing against a backdrop of void and steel. Behind it loomed the unmistakable silhouette of an armada. Towering dreadnoughts, sleek and precise in their construction, hung motionless in the abyss, their hulls gleaming under distant stars. Warships of countless designs, each belonging to a different species under the Galactic Council's command, formed an unbreakable wall of power. They were not arranged as an escort. They were a noose. Then came the voice, calm, deliberate, and utterly devoid of emotion. You are an anomaly. Your aggression, your unchecked expansion, your refusal to integrate. You are a threat to galactic stability. Surrender your military assets, dismantle your hypergate network, and submit to the governance of the Galactic Council. Resistance will result in annihilation. No embellishments. No theatrics. A simple demand followed by a single unspoken truth. There would be no negotiations. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the transmission ended. For a long moment, there was silence. Not the silence of fear, not the hush of a species caught unprepared, but something colder, calculation. Deep beneath the Earth's surface, beneath layers of reinforced steel and shielding, in the vast war rooms of humanity's most guarded installations, the real response had already begun. Generals leaned over strategic projections, their eyes scanning the holographic models of the incoming fleet. Scientists murmured calculations, adjusting orbital trajectories, estimating energy signatures. Intelligence officers sifted through classified reports, dissecting every word, every pause in the Council's transmission, searching for leverage. No one wasted time on panic. No one debated ethics or morality. The question was not whether the Council had the right to issue such an ultimatum. The question was simply this: how quickly could they be dismantled? For centuries, humanity had been underestimated. The same mistake, repeated throughout history, across battlefields and empires. The Romans had been seen as nothing more than warring tribes before they had crushed entire civilizations beneath their banners. The British had been a scattered island people before they commanded the seas. The Americans had been reckless upstarts before they had redefined the very nature of war. And now they were a young species standing at the threshold of galactic power. Too clever, too unpredictable, too dangerous to be left unchecked. The Council saw them as a problem to be contained. They didn't realize they had just walked into a war that had already been won. By the time the Council's fleet settled into position at the edge of the Sol system, humanity had already acted. The hyperlanes, the vast, invisible highways of faster-than-light travel, collapsed in a synchronized detonation of destabilization fields. What once had been open and direct paths now twisted into chaotic, impassable corridors of hyperspatial turbulence. The Council's armada, which had arrived with the confidence of invaders expecting swift dominance, suddenly found itself isolated, its escape routes severed. Across the vastness of human-controlled space, listening posts on the edges of occupied star systems flickered offline. Not because they had been attacked, but because they had been allowed to transmit until now. The Council spies, long hidden within human society, suddenly found their networks collapsing around them. Safe houses raided. Communications intercepted. Identities exposed. Not by accident, but because they had been permitted to operate, until this very moment. High above Mars, an invisible network of orbital defense platforms powered up in silence. No fanfare. No announcements. Weapons that had been hidden in plain sight for decades, disguised as civilian infrastructure, as long decommissioned projects, as simple debris, came online in unison. On the outskirts of Jupiter's moons, a fleet materialized. Not the grand, ceremonial ships of diplomacy, nor the well-documented vessels of humanity's public defense forces. These were the silent ones, warships built in the shadows, never acknowledged, never paraded, never even admitted to exist. Their technology was not meant to impress. It was not designed for show. It was engineered for survival. And so, humanity did not answer the Council's warning with speeches. There were no broadcasts of defiance, no grand proclamations of sovereignty. They answered with the quiet, inevitable pull of a trigger. A single Council scout ship, positioned at the perimeter of the fleet, vanished. Not in a flash of light, not in a burst of fire, but in a whisper. One moment it was there, transmitting, monitoring. The next, it was simply gone, its atoms scattered into the void. A fraction of a second later, another ship disappeared. Then another. And another. The Council's fleet, still believing itself in control, had not yet realized what was happening. The weapons arrayed against them did not scream through the dark with visible energy trails. They did not give off warning signs. They did not miss. Humanity's opening move was not a declaration of war. It was an execution. The Council's fleet drifted in the silent void, oblivious to the trap closing around them. From their vantage, they still held the advantage. Vast warships in perfect formation, weapons primed, shields humming with latent energy. They had arrived expecting a swift and uncontested victory, their numbers alone enough to force surrender. But space was not their ally. On the surface, the darkness between the stars seemed empty, indifferent. Yet it was anything but. Within that void, something lurked, unseen, unheard, waiting for the moment to strike. Humanity had spent centuries perfecting warfare, not through brute force, but through patience. It had never been about the biggest ships, the strongest weapons, or the most imposing fleets. History had proven that empires did not fall to superior numbers. They fell to shadows, to deception, to the enemy they never saw coming. The first ship to die was a Council corvette, positioned at the fleet's perimeter. One moment, its sensors pulsed, sweeping the surrounding space for threats. The next, silence. No explosion, no energy discharge, no trace of an attacker, only an empty place where a vessel had once been. A heartbeat later, another ship vanished. Then another. The Council's admirals hesitated. Their fleet had the advantage, or so they thought. Every war they had waged followed the same pattern. An enemy was cornered, its defenses overwhelmed, its forces scattered. That was how war worked. It was how it had always worked. But humanity had rewritten those rules. On the bridge of the Caldera, flagship of the Council's fleet, Admiral Vorin stood rigid, his reptilian gaze fixed on the empty void where his ships had once been. He exhaled slowly, his species' version of controlled panic. Report. His voice was steady, but the edges of command had dulled with unease. The bridge officers scrambled through their consoles, searching for explanations. Static-laced transmissions crackled through comm channels, but none made sense. No explosion signatures. No energy readings. No known weapon could have done this. That last statement chilled him more than the silence. Vorin turned to his tactical officer, a six-limbed creature with quivering mandibles. If they're using stealth technology, I want countermeasures deployed now. Admiral, our sensors should have detected movement, heat, residual mass displacement, anything. But there's nothing. Another officer, a pale-skinned avian, glanced up from her display. Sir, our hyperlane access has been cut off. No jump routes are functional. Vorin's stomach coiled. A blockade was expected. But this was something else. Human forces, he asked. A hesitation. Then, none detected. The words rang hollow. Vorin had studied humans. Unlike some of his colleagues, he had not dismissed them as a reckless, short-lived species. He had seen their expansion, their wars, their rapid adaptation. He had read the reports that others ignored, the ones that spoke of battles fought not in open fields but in the shadows, where enemies simply disappeared. And now, here in the darkness, it was happening again. A sudden chime on his console signaled an incoming transmission. Not from his fleet, but from outside. Human. He accepted the link. The bridge darkened, screens shifting to display a single figure. A woman, human, clad in an unmarked uniform. Her presence was unnerving not because she appeared threatening, but because she was utterly calm. Behind her, the soft glow of a command station flickered. No insignia, no banners, only silent efficiency. Admiral Vorin, she greeted him, her voice smooth, measured. I assume by now you understand your position. Voron's claws curled against the railing. Identify yourself. She ignored the demand. You are cut off. No reinforcements. No retreat. No options. A pause. Deliberate. This war was over before you arrived. Voron bared his teeth. You think disabling a few ships will make us yield? For the first time, her expression shifted. Not amusement, not arrogance, just something close to pity. You misunderstand, she said. Your fleet was never a threat. The transmission cut. Voron barely had time to process before another ship vanished from his displays. Then another. The caldera systems flickered, temporary, but enough to confirm what he already feared. They were being dismantled, piece by piece. A sinking realization settled in his chest. This was not a battle. This was a hunt. And they were the prey. Admiral Voron had commanded fleets across centuries of conflict. He had shattered sieges, crushed rebellions, and outmaneuvered some of the most brilliant tacticians in recorded history. He had seen empires collapse and had orchestrated the fall of entire worlds. And yet, standing on the bridge of the caldera, watching his fleet unravel before his eyes, he felt something foreign coiling in his chest. Dread. The Council had overestimated their strength. That much was undeniable. Humanity had not met their approach with desperation or bravado. They had responded with quiet, methodical annihilation. His fleet still existed, on paper. The tactical display showed his warships in formation, their markers steady. But those signals were ghosts. Phantom echoes of ships that no longer existed. The caldera's bridge was silent but charged, as if every officer on board had reached the same unspoken conclusion. They were already dead. Voron's clawed fingers curled against the metal railing. He had been played, led into a perfect snare, so flawlessly executed that the battle had ended before a single shot was fired. The humans had not hidden their strength. They had let the Council come, let them believe their own illusions of dominance. Then, once the noose had been tightened, they had begun the culling. Another ship winked out of existence. No explosion. No energy signature. No debris. Gone. His second-in-command, Tavel, a hardened strategist with dark, unblinking eyes, turned toward him, mandibles clicking in restrained anxiety. 39 ships lost, he reported, his voice eerily measured. 12 more unresponsive. Voron's jaw tightened. Cause. Tavel hesitated, glancing at the sensor readouts. No known energy signatures. No projectile impact. No trace of an attack. The implications settled over them like a burial shroud. The Council fleet was not being defeated. It was being erased. The bridge crew moved with practiced efficiency, but Voron could feel the undercurrent of fear infecting them. Not fear of battle. They had all known the risk of war. This was something worse. The terror of the unknown. Voron had studied human warfare. The Council had dismissed their rise as reckless ambition, a product of luck and opportunism. But Voron had seen the deeper pattern, the relentless drive beneath their expansion. They did not fight for territory. They did not fight for glory. They fought to win. And they had been planning for this war far longer than the Council had realized. The hum of the bridge dimmed as an incoming transmission flickered onto the main display. She was back. The woman from before. The same unmarked uniform. The same unreadable expression. No insignia, no rank. Only cold, unwavering certainty. Admiral Voron. Her voice was steady. We should talk. Voron's claws tightened around the railing. I do not negotiate with insurgents. She exhaled, as if mildly disappointed. This isn't a negotiation. A subtle flick of her eyes suggested she was scanning something off-screen. Your fleet is compromised. Your reinforcements are out of reach. Your supply lines will collapse within the hour. By then, your remaining vessels will follow. She leaned forward slightly. You are no longer an admiral, Voron. You are a liability. The word struck like a blade to the gut. He knew what she was doing. He had done it himself, in 100 different campaigns. When brute force wasn't enough, when an enemy held too tightly to their pride, you broke them from within. You assume I will surrender. His voice was controlled, but the weight behind it had shifted. The woman tilted her head slightly, a ghost of amusement in her expression. I assume nothing. She folded her hands in front of her. But your superiors? A beat of silence. They will. Voron's breath stilled. Your fleet was meant to be a show of force, she continued. A demonstration. A reminder of the Council's dominance. Her gaze darkened. But what happens when the Council realizes you were the demonstration? A sick, twisting sensation settled in his chest. They will erase you, she said, voice soft but unyielding. Not because of your failure. Because acknowledging it would mean acknowledging us. She let the silence stretch, the weight of her words sinking in. You know how this works, Admiral. I'm not telling you anything you haven't already realized. She was right. If he returned now, he would not be welcomed as a survivor. He would not be honored for fighting a hopeless battle. He would be eliminated, his name wiped from the records, his legacy erased. The Council did not tolerate weakness. And worse, the humans knew it. His gaze flickered to the tactical display. His fleet, his empire, was still there in ghostly markers. But he knew better. The war had ended before it had begun. This was decided long before you arrived, the woman said, almost gently. Your people just didn't see it. Voron exhaled, slow and deliberate. He had never lost a battle. But this had never been a battle at all. He met the woman's gaze through the screen. For the first time in his long career, he was no longer a commander. He was a man standing on the precipice of annihilation, staring into the abyss. And the abyss was staring back. A long, terrible silence passed between them. Then, finally, he spoke. What do you want? The woman's lips curled into the faintest trace of a smile. Now we're getting somewhere. The bridge of the caldera was deathly quiet, save for the soft hum of failing systems. Admiral Voron stood rigid, his reptilian gaze locked onto the woman on the screen. Her expression remained composed, but there was something beneath it now. Certainty. Not arrogance, not cruelty, just the unwavering confidence of someone who knew the game was already over. Voron had seen many faces in war. He had looked into the desperate eyes of defeated rulers, had watched proud generals realize too late that their armies had been shattered. Yet never had he been the one on the other side of that silence. She had won. He exhaled slowly, tasting the metallic sting of recycled air. What do you want? The woman studied him, as if weighing whether he was even worth answering. Acknowledgement, she said finally, that your people lost. Voron bared his teeth. You want me to kneel? No, she replied. I want you to listen. Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. The Council will never admit they miscalculated, she continued. They will not broadcast this defeat. They will not rally their forces in righteous vengeance. They will erase you, and then they will pretend you were never here. A cold truth. One Voron had already considered. And if I refuse to cooperate? He asked. The woman's dark eyes did not waver. Then your fleet dies here, ship by ship, until nothing remains. A muscle in Voron's jaw twitched. He despised being cornered. He had spent his life orchestrating traps for others. Yet here he was, ensnared. Tell me your terms, he said, voice flat. A flicker of approval crossed her face. Your fleet will withdraw. Not as a retreat. As a message. Voron frowned. A message. She nodded. You will return to the Council and tell them what happened here. Not a lie. Not a sanitized version. The truth. You will make them understand. He let out a sharp, humorless breath. Understand what? That we walked into a slaughter. No, she leaned forward slightly. That this war is already over. The words carried weight. Voron had assumed the human strategy was containment. A single decisive victory to force the Council into reconsideration. But there was finality in her tone. She wasn't just saying they had lost this battle. She was saying they had lost everything. Voron narrowed his eyes. Explain. A pause. Then, you were the first. A chill ran through him. The first fleet, she clarified. Not the first target. A dull roar filled Voron's ears. How many? His voice came out quieter than he intended. The woman's silence was the only answer he needed. They hadn't simply cut off his fleet. They had done this, This precise, calculated extermination, elsewhere. Entire systems, strategic sectors, vanished before the Council even realized they were under attack. He had not been the opening act of a war. He had been the epilogue. Vorin turned to Tavel, whose usual controlled demeanor had cracked. His mandibles twitched as he analyzed data feeds that no longer told them anything useful. "How did we miss this?" Vorin murmured, more to himself than anyone else. The woman answered anyway. "You never saw us as equals," she said. "You assumed we would fight the way you do. You assumed we would push outward, seize territory, make bold declarations." A pause. "But we had no interest in conquest. Only control. Control. That was the piece the Council had never considered. Humanity had spent decades, perhaps centuries, watching, learning the invisible architecture of the galactic order, studying its weaknesses, its dependencies, its illusions of strength. And while the Council had ruled from above, confident in their dominance, the humans had rewritten the foundation beneath them. "You never looked down," she said. "You only looked forward." Vorin clenched his jaw. It was not an insult. It was worse. It was a fact. A slow dread settled in his bones. "Then why allow us to live?" he asked finally. Another silence. Another unreadable look. Then, softly, "Because you are not the problem." The bridge crew stiffened. Even Tavel, ever controlled, turned sharply toward the screen. Vorin inhaled deeply. "If not us," he said, voice measured, "then who?" The woman didn't answer right away. Then, for the first time, her expression shifted. A hint of something colder than war. "The Council is built on control," she said. "Control of trade, of technology, of history itself. But more than anything, control of fear. They keep their members in line through intimidation, through the idea that no species can rise beyond what they allow." Her eyes darkened. "And yet here we are." Vorin's claws dug into the railing. "You're not fighting a war against the Council." "No," she agreed. "We're removing it." It wasn't a declaration of war. It was an obituary. Vorin had spent his entire life believing the Council was unshakable, that it had always existed and always would exist. And yet, in the span of a single battle, not even a battle, but an execution, that foundation had begun to crack. He had believed he was the apex of this war. But he was just another relic, standing on the precipice of something far greater than himself. The woman straightened. "Leave, Admiral. Take your remaining ships. Deliver the message. And then watch what happens next." She did not need to tell him what that would be. For the first time in his life, Admiral Vorin was given an order he had no intention of disobeying. The caldera cut through the void like a phantom, silent and directionless, a warship stripped of its purpose. The few vessels that remained of the once mighty Council fleet trailed behind, damaged, drifting like wounded creatures returning to a den that no longer felt like home. Admiral Vorin stood at the forward observation deck, hands clasped behind his back, his posture rigid with unspoken rage. The hum of the ship's engines filled the air, a low and constant reminder that, despite everything, they still existed. They had survived. But what had they survived for? Tavel approached, his footsteps measured. Even without looking, Vorin knew what expression his second-in-command wore. Tavel had been with him through a dozen campaigns, had seen entire civilizations fall beneath the Council's might. He had never doubted their rule. Now, his mandibles clicked with unease. "We were never meant to win," Tavel said. His voice lacked its usual sharpness, as if saying the words aloud made them more real. Vorin did not turn. "No. They didn't just defeat us," Tavel continued. "They planned for us. Used us. We weren't an army to them. We were a lesson." Vorin let the silence stretch. "They let you live," Tavel said, voice lowering. "Do you understand what that means?" Vorin finally turned to face him. "Yes." Tavel's mandibles twitched. "Then why are we going back?" The question hung between them. It was not spoken in defiance, nor in fear, but in something worse. Uncertainty. Vorin exhaled. "Because they want us to." The answer offered no comfort. They had walked into a war that had already ended. They had been defeated before their engines had cooled, before their weapons had locked onto a single target. And now, like obedient messengers, they carried humanity's verdict back to the very people who would refuse to hear it. It took weeks to reach the Council's core worlds. The journey was too quiet. No enemy pursued them. No transmissions demanded an explanation. The hyperlanes lay untouched, open as though nothing had ever happened. The humans had no interest in a chase. Their war was already over. When they finally arrived, the sight of the Council's heart should have reassured them. Massive stations hung in orbit, polished and gleaming, their surfaces unmarred by war. The great capital planets still glowed with life, cities stretching across continents, their lights burning as they always had. But something had changed. The illusion of power had been shattered. Vorin could feel it before a single word had been spoken. The stillness of it, the weight of what was coming. The summons arrived swiftly, as expected. The High Council did not waste time. The chamber was as vast as he remembered. Ornate pillars stretched to the ceiling, their surfaces etched with the victories of the past, the wars that had shaped the known galaxy. Vorin had once admired them, had believed those battles were eternal. Now they felt like graves. At the center of the chamber, beneath a golden dome of artificial light, sat the speaker. A being of immense stature, 6 eyes gleaming, draped in the ceremonial robes of a ruler who had never known fear. His gaze bore into Vorin as he stepped forward, every movement in the room measured, expectant. "Admiral," the speaker said, his voice heavy with expectation. "Explain yourself." Vorin stood tall. The fleet was defeated. A ripple of disbelief moved through the chamber. A thing like fire, low and slow, growing with each passing second. "Defeated," the speaker repeated, each syllable deliberate. "By humans." Vorin did not blink. "Yes." A voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Impossible." Counselor Jorik, pale and poised, sneered from his seat. "You expect us to believe that a species that could barely reach its own moon a century ago overpowered the most advanced fleet in existence?" "Yes," Vorin said simply. The murmurs swelled into open discord. Denial. He could see it in their faces. They would not accept it. They could not accept it. The speaker leaned forward slightly. "Explain how." Vorin's breath was slow and measured. "We walked into a war that had already ended. They had been preparing for this for decades. Maybe longer. They severed our hyperlanes, infiltrated our networks, disabled our ships without firing a visible shot." His voice tightened. "They dismantled us before we even arrived." Jorik scoffed. "And yet you are here. If they were as unstoppable as you claim, you would not be standing before us." Vorin allowed himself the faintest of smiles. "They let me live to bring you this message." Jorik's expression soured. "And what message is that?" Vorin's voice was steady. "That the war is over." A heavy silence fell over the chamber. Jorik exhaled sharply. "Over." His tone turned scornful. "They have not attacked our worlds. They have made no demands. They do not seek our surrender." He gestured toward the others. "This is nothing but posturing. They don't need to attack." Vorin's voice cut through the noise. "They don't need to conquer. They have already won." The council was a body of rulers, of species that had believed their dominion was eternal. They had dictated the course of history for centuries. And now, Vorin watched as that certainty cracked. The speaker's gaze was unreadable. "You believe they intend to destroy us?" Vorin's jaw tightened. "No," he hesitated, then spoke the truth that had settled into his bones. "But they will erase what we were." That was the true horror of it. Not war. Not annihilation. Obsolescence. The council had ruled through fear. Through order. Through the illusion that they were untouchable. And now, they were being offered a single bitter choice. Accept reality, or be forgotten. The speaker's expression did not change. Jorik's lips curled. "And what do you suggest, Admiral?" Vorin held his gaze. "I suggest we survive." The words landed like a death sentence. The council had never been asked to survive. They had always been the ones dictating terms, shaping the future. And yet, here they stood, the weight of a dying empire pressing into them. For the first time Vorin saw it. Not just denial, but fear. The speaker was the first to break the silence. His voice was quiet, measured. You have done your duty, Admiral. A dismissal. A verdict. Vorin inclined his head. He had done what was required. The rest was out of his hands. As he turned to leave, he felt the weight of history shifting behind him. The cracks had already formed. And somewhere, far beyond the Council's reach, humanity was already rewriting the future. The Council had ruled for centuries, shaping the fate of the galaxy with an unshakable grip. Their word had been law, their fleets untouchable, their enemies erased before they could rise. Until now. Across the capital, the first cracks in their dominion had begun to show. The halls of power, once a sanctuary of certainty, had grown restless. The whispers started in the lower chambers, murmurs of betrayal, of fear, of something shifting beneath them. What had once been unthinkable had become inevitable. Admiral Vorin stood before the great viewing window of his private quarters, staring down at the luminous world below. From here, the capital still looked the same. Gleaming cities, bustling trade routes, the silent hum of control pulsing through every system. But he knew better. The illusion was breaking. His hands curled into fists. He had delivered the truth, and now the weight of it pressed into him like a silent blade. The Council had not reacted with fury or strategy. They had reacted with silence. And that silence was more dangerous than any fleet. The soft chime of his door broke his thoughts. Tavel entered, his movements clipped, his mandibles twitching in restrained tension. He had served Vorin for decades, had fought beside him in wars that reshaped the stars. Now, for the first time, he looked uncertain. "They know," he said. Vorin turned, his gaze sharp. "How many?" Tavel exhaled. "Enough. Enough to change everything." The humans had not attacked, had not issued demands, had not occupied a single world. They had done something far worse. They had made the truth undeniable. Across the outer systems, Council forces had begun to falter. Supply lines had gone dark, entire colonies slipping from control without a single battle fought. Merchant guilds rerouted their trade, ignoring Council decrees. Even the smaller fleets, those sworn to serve, had begun to drift. Silent defections, unannounced but understood. The Council was bleeding out, and humanity had not lifted a finger. "They are waiting," Tavel said. Vorin nodded. He had felt it too, that eerie, suffocating patience. The humans did not rush. They did not gloat. They did nothing at all. And somehow that was worse. A summons arrived. The High Council had convened again, though this time, the weight in the air had changed. Vorin walked through the vast corridors, their grand architecture suddenly hollow. Once, these halls had been filled with the confidence of rulers. Now, they felt like a tomb waiting for its occupants. Inside the chamber, the tension was a living thing. The speaker sat in the center, his expression carved from stone. Around him, the council members murmured, their voices sharp with uncertainty. Jorik was there, but his usual arrogance had dimmed. His hands were clasped tightly, his gaze darting between the others. He knew. Vorin stepped forward, his voice steady. "You have all seen it." No one spoke, but he knew they had. "This is not war," he continued. "Not in the way we understand it." The speaker studied him. "Then what is it?" Vorin exhaled. "Replacement." A ripple of discomfort passed through them. Some shifted in their seats, others looked away. "They do not need to fight us," he continued. "They only need to wait." The truth settled like a slow poison. The council had survived countless rebellions, had crushed empires before they could rise, had ensured that order was maintained. But this was different. This was not war. It was irrelevance. "The outer colonies are abandoning us," Tavel said, stepping forward. "Trade is shifting. Our fleets are weakening. And humanity has done nothing but exist." Jorik's voice was sharp. "Then we crush them." Vorin met his gaze. "With what?" Jorik faltered. "Our fleets." Vorin continued. "The ones stranded in the void, severed from hyperlanes we no longer control?" He gestured around them. "Our economy? Already unraveling? The territories slipping through our fingers?" Jorik's hands clenched. "So you are saying we simply accept this?" I am saying we have lost. The words burned as they left him, but they needed to be spoken. For a long moment, no one moved. Then the speaker spoke. And if we do not fight? Voron's gaze was steady. Then we survive. Survival. It had never been a word the council used for themselves. They were the rulers, the architects of destiny. But now they were something else entirely. The weight of it was suffocating. Then, a sound. A sharp chime from the council's primary relay. An incoming transmission. Human. For the first time in history, they had initiated contact. The chamber stilled as the transmission flickered to life. The woman appeared again, the same unreadable calm in her gaze. "Counselors," she greeted. The silence stretched. No one spoke. Finally, the speaker exhaled. "What do you want?" The woman tilted her head slightly, considering the question. Then she spoke, her voice smooth. "To offer you a choice." Every counselor tensed. Voron remained still. "What choice?" She smiled. Not cruelly. Not with malice. Just with the quiet patience of someone who already knew the answer. "To step aside," she said, "or be forgotten. No threats. No ultimatums. Just reality." A final silence stretched. And in that silence the council fell.